that all of our listeners, you'll be welcome to engage with us on the chat platform. It's a pity that we can't see you in person, and that is because of the webinar nature of our virtual engagement. But we would love to hear your comments, your views, and your perceptions of where you think that the planning profession should be going. We are anticipating that we will have a chance to respond to some of the questions, but if we don't have a chance to do so, please be reminded that we will be recording this session and we'll try to respond to as many of those questions as we can. Just to set the scene, I'd like to start by thanking our members, panel members who've joined us here today. And my name is Nelly Lester. Lest I forget to introduce myself. I'm a member of South African Council of Planners, and I do serve with a team of very able women in our women's forum. We've elected to ensure that despite all the COVID issues, that we are still carrying on with our forum as would have been planned for last year. Last year, the event was held in Cape Town, and the response was also just as kind of brilliant as today. So we're looking forward to this engagement process. I'd like to start by just reading a statement of our objective for the webinar, just so that all of us are on the same page. So it's a webinar hosted by the women planners of the South African Council of Planners. The objective of the webinar is to provide a platform to amplify the voices of women planners in response to COVID-19. It is also a call for action for planners to take their rightful place in charting lasting solutions in response to the built environment challenges made bare by the COVID-19 pandemic. Planning as a profession owes its roots to the practical responses to epidemics and pandemics in the past. From the plague of 1347 to 1351, the Spanish flu of 1918 to 1920, to the various cholera outbreaks. Cities that act early are said to have had much less deaths in comparison and almost have been able to see themselves beyond crises as we are currently experiencing in the country and indeed in the world. Some of the actions enabled significant advancement in planning as a recognized profession. You can think about the tenements in England during the Black Plague and all the various water challenges that America's faced during the cholera outbreaks there. And so the organizing of the built environment to many extents has always taken a further step when we are faced with this kind of pandemics. And it would be a pity that in COVID-19, we as planners in South Africa find ourselves to not be as responsive or taking advantage of the challenges that we're currently facing to present our profession and to present to the others what we can do when we work collectively. The COVID pandemic, as we say, is one like no other. Planning as a profession should and can do a lot more to ensure that our communities are indeed living and working in safe environment. We have set out a set of questions that we'd like to engage in our conversation, and I'll just briefly go through them as we converse so that we remind ourselves of what the issues are. The first question that we'd like to ask is, what can our cities and communities do better to eliminate violence against women and children? One might ask, violence against women and children, we know too well, especially now, every day in the statistics we hear about women who have been murdered, women who have been abused, women who have been literally killed, either by family members or partners that we are aware of. So what can we do better in terms of our built environment to ensure in this month of women that we are able to seek for some tangible solutions in response to those kinds of concerns? The second question is, what can our cities and communities do better to lessen the burden of caring for the sick and the vulnerable members of our communities and in our families? We do know that either many of us do have either ailing parents or we do have family members who have got comorbidities, and how are we able to ensure that the environments that they're living in are also able to ride the kind of pandemics that we have currently? Thirdly, what can our cities, communities do better to ensure that our children can still live and play in safe environments? I do know many of the members in this panel as well have got children at home at present. And just the notion of, since March, we've been cooped down and wondering on how to ensure that they are either getting stimulated, can be able to play safely, and are still able to thrive as young children and the future leaders of our nation. And then we are also asking about how we can ensure that we improve safety for women, particularly in the transport sector. We do know that South Africa is one of the countries that has got the highest inequality gaps worldwide. And we know also the burden of public transport, that most women still bear the burden of either leaving their homes quite early, but also traveling in very trying conditions. We can think about our railway stations, we can think about our taxi ranks, we can think about just getting from your house to the place where you connect to the public transport. And many of our women have suffered during those early hour mornings or late evenings trying to get themselves home safely. What is our built environment doing about those conditions? So in a nutshell, that's kind of the context that we've set up for this webinar this afternoon. And we are informed, and we would like to also recognize, the professional women in their various roles of practice that are doing what they can, women across the world doing what they can as professionals to ensure that we live in a better world, and indeed we leave a better world for our future generation. I call to mind one of the comments made by the Commonwealth women planners in their manifesto, where they say, when community development challenges arise, gender inequalities are often exacerbated. When one gender is underrepresented while planning and designing the built environment, their concerns and needs are often overlooked and ignored. And therefore, for us as women planners today, we would like to ensure that in collaboration with the other built environment professionals, that we do make it clear about what it is that we as women experience and what it is that we would like to see advanced amongst our built environment professions going forward. In the context of COVID-19, but also using this Women's Month as the place to be able to do so. And I think with those few remarks, I would like to now invite our panel members. And what I'd like us to do, panelists, is simply to say your name and say hello, say your name, and then give us one sentence that comes to mind when you think of COVID-19. And we will use the same speaking list as we have. So we'll start with Lulu and go all the way down to Professor Hope. So Lulu, if you can start, please.
My name is Lulu Gwagwa, and the one sentence that comes about COVID-19 is what? Is just being scared.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Yondela. The sentence that comes to mind is, we're no longer working from home, but we're living at work, and it sucks.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Radia Sahabuddin. The sentence that comes to mind is that things that have already been the inefficiencies, inequalities have been exacerbated, has been laid bare for everyone to see during COVID. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon to the attendees, and happy Women's Month. One word that comes into my mind is innovation and a different way of thinking.
Hi everyone, I'm Kiara Rampal. I'm a final year master student of Tana Regional Planning at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. I think COVID-19 is teaching us how to design healthier cities.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Hope. What comes in my mind right now is that we are busy fighting an enemy we cannot see or touch. And we have to social distance from something we can't see. So we don't know how far we should be. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those remarks, everybody. Our listeners and those who have signed in, we would like to thank you very much for taking an interest in women in planning. We've been advised that we've got not only women, but men have joined us in this fight. So please chat to us, tell us what you're thinking, tell us what your views are. And as we listen to this conversation that we're beginning to set together. Without further ado, I would like to just give a brief background of our first speaker this afternoon. They have introduced themselves in name, but I think it's also helpful to just give you a sense of who they are and where they're coming from. Our first speaker this afternoon is Dr. Lulu Gwagwa. She is, as many would know, one of the first Black women America. And so for us to have her here together with us in this panel is a real privilege, because we can look back into time and also look forward in gaining from her rich background and her rich history. She currently is not practicing in planning directly, but you'll see from her CV that she has kind of traversed a whole range of terrain. She's currently the CEO of Leraco Investment. She is most recently, I think, and will be interested in this, is serving as a chairperson of Zutari, which is formerly Ericon. I think Ericon created their own Africa branch, and Lulu is very much at the center core of that. She has previously been a Director General at Public Works, and these were way back from 1995 to 1998. She was also the CEO of Independent Development Trust from 1998 to 2003. Lulu has got a vast range of interest, and she's also in many ways a philanthropist in the work that she carries on doing in her own community. You'd have heard from some of the conversations she's been having, referring back to her high school years, and even starting way back when planning was not really a profession for many to go into, let alone women. She was a finalist in 2001 in the Nedbank Business Women of the Year Awards. In 2018, she was named one of the Awudi Future Leaders, Future Shapers. She's a fellow of the African Leadership Initiative, a keen reader of African women writers. I was very intrigued to hear her say this. And she's also an aspiring photographer. If you visit her website, you will see some of very delightful photos that she's placed there as well, just in her own private pursuit. So from that context, we do have with us somebody who's kind of seen it all, from our democratic start of government to working in the private sector, to working in her own community, and really supporting from all kinds of angles. So I'd like to welcome Lulu to be our first speaker, to share with us her views in this time of COVID and in this Women's Month. Lulu, I hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Nelly, for those kind words. I'm always very sensitive to my CV. So in Public Works, I was a DDG, not DG. So I always say to young people, it's always very important to present yourself exactly as you are and not add in one sentence. So I was a DG and not DG. Thanks, Nelly, and thanks to SACPLAN Women's Forum for the invitation. And I'm really excited to share this digital stage with Yondela, who I've known from previous life, Radia, Gugu, Kiara, and Hope, and all the participants in the webinar. Today's topic, as Nelly you said, is planning profession post-COVID. What can we do better in our communities, towns, cities, to improve the conditions of women, children, and the vulnerable groups? Now, reflecting on this, for me, it became obvious that a focus on women automatically addresses issues of children and the vulnerable. And this is simply because of the gendered nature of our society, which we all know. The triple role of women, that is the reproductive role, the productive role, and the community role that Caroline Moser talked about in the 80s, is still very real today in our societies. What I know, though, Nelly, as a mother and yesteryear planner, as you said, I don't consider myself a planner anymore, although once a planner, always a planner. What I know for sure is that because of their gender roles, women and men use space and infrastructure very differently. For example, global data shows that women and men travel different modes of transport, as you said, at different times and for different reasons and different purposes. Poor access to transport impacts women's access to health, to education, and to economic activities. Currently, for example, we define it very interesting when people think about peak hour. Peak hour is defined around the formal male economy and disregards women's social responsibilities and participation in the informal economic activities that happen outside the peak hour. So even peak hour means different things to women and men, and yet in terms of our planning, transport infrastructure and everything, we've got a particular understanding of what is peak hour, even during this time of COVID. Also, we know that a focus only on large infrastructure projects tend to disadvantage women. For women in rural, clean water is as critical as access to irrigation water. Clean water cuts out on time spent fetching water from the river and taking children to the clinic. So it's as simple as all of that. It provides them with an opportunity to participate in economic activities. For a rural girl, it is also an opportunity to go to school. So just access to a borehole for a rural girl, and I grew up in rural areas, so I say this not just as a planner, but as somebody who grew up and still has a home in rural areas. That access to just a borehole is what decides whether that girl child goes to school or not, and what time she actually gets to school. Things like location of bus stops and walkways, availability and location of safe children's play facilities are essential to women and children's safety, which can become a very real existential issue for women in South Africa, as we all know. These are very critical issues that should be top of mind for planners at all times, and particularly so during this COVID period. The good thing about COVID for me is that its pervasive and all-encompassing impact is shining a very bright spotlight on global, national, and community fault lines that we have kind of learned to live with, even as planners. Never before has the conflicting nature of interests and needs been so obvious as we are seeing today. At one level, people are concerned about being able to go on holiday. That's me and you. And yet others are concerned about just having clean water to wash their hands frequently. Others are concerned about being able to jog around suburbs, like me and you. And yet others are concerned about social distancing in dense squatter settlement and shacks. Some children are continuing learning virtually, like my children and your children, whilst other children in my rural village are confined in their houses with neither electricity nor internet access, meaning for them there is no education going on. So those fault lines are actually just getting deeper and wider. And that's what COVID is doing through society, which is a challenge for us as planners. Essentially, COVID-19 for me, Nelly, is showing whether and how much my grandmother's life in Krumuk village, Unumzinkulu, has or has not been impacted or changed post-1994 by the planners like me and you. So where does this leave planning and planners? Planning and planners, for me, frame, or should I say, should frame the development agenda. And I underline should. Particularly the spatial framework within which development happens. What I'm really asking this afternoon is whether the planning profession, at least in this country, is really playing this critical role and transformative role. My submission here this afternoon is that as a profession, we are not seen as neither critical nor essential in the development discourse in general, even during this COVID period. Now, Nelly, I will use my privileged position of being a retired professional planner in good standing. I still pay my fees to raise a couple of points, but not in any order of importance. But I decided to just be quite blunt and controversial because I'm a retired planner, so I don't need a tender or anything from anybody because I'm retired. So the first point I will raise is that in my view, from where I'm sitting right now, the planning profession is not vocal and visible in the national development discourse. I'm not sure if planners are organized in a way that allows the planning profession to strategically position itself effectively, to effectively play its leadership role in development. For example, the nature of our training as planners is such that we are strategically skilled to understand both the supply and demand side of infrastructure and development. Yet, I want to argue we haven't positioned the profession to bring transformative outcomes to communities we serve in any meaningful way. For example, as part of the COVID-19 interventions, government has announced a multi-billion rand infrastructure program. How many planners are informing the debate around this critical infrastructure program, which is meant to impact our society both during COVID and post-COVID? How many of us are at the center of that debate? Having said that, in my view, around these issues, we are the best in terms of training, strategically located to see the big picture. I want to argue, secondly, that part of the challenge is where and how the planning profession is positioned in relation to other built environment professionals. So why is planning still located in land affairs? Please clarify that for me. Is this profession only about land reform? I'm just trying to understand. As I say, I don't practice anymore, so I don't know. In what way does this represent the general understanding of what planning is about and who planners are and what planners can bring to the table? As the planning profession, are we comfortable with this? If not, what are we doing about it? It seems to me that planning at the moment, some of the strategic areas of that are about planning currently, again, I'm saying from far, are driven in Treasury, in COCTA, and to some extent in public works. But that's not where we are. I haven't seen many planners in Treasury. I haven't seen many planners in COCTA. I haven't seen many planners in DPW, even when I was there myself. Thirdly, how are planners positioned to drive the development agenda at municipal level? Remember, municipal level is the interface between communities and government. What is the profession? Why is the planning profession not insisting of being in the driving seat of the IDP process? Are we advocating for IDP managers to be planners only? As far as I know, as I've seen, just about anybody can be an IDP manager. Are we comfortable with this? And are we comfortable to be only understood at a municipal level to be those that deal with development control? I'm not minimizing the role of development control. I'm a planner, that's where I started myself. But I will argue that, as we know as planners, development control, was important, is really an administrative process at the tail end of the planning process. But somehow we've been pushed to the tail end of the development process, not where we should be starting, which is at a strategic level, I would argue. Prof, when I was teaching in the planning school, that was now donkey years ago, more than 20 years ago, I always emphasize that planning is about balancing competing needs and interests. That planning is about essentially an exercise of allocation of resources. It is not just about a technical exercise. For me, this is what is so special and exciting about planning compared to other built environment professions. The question, though, is whether as a planners, we really appreciate this, and whether we are skilled appropriately to navigate and maneuver our way through those political debates in the council chamber to ensure transformative outcomes for our communities. Lastly, Nelly, the last point I want to raise is, here I will dare to be controversial. Again, as I said, this is what you do at retirement. You say whatever you think, whatever way you want to. There's something about apartheid planners that there's something that apartheid planners seem to have understood better than us today. And I would argue that part of that is that apartheid planners understood that your role as a planner is really to support the strategic agenda of the country, where the country is going. Not saying I agree or whatever happened, none of us around today agree with that. But it's just understood what is the development agenda, what is the strategic agenda. And then from there, as a planner, your role then becomes to translate that into what are the outcomes that come from that. And I would argue that is the reason why my grandmother's spatial location is still rural Umzimkhulu. It's because that was how the planners of the time really did their job very well. And that's the reason why my grandmother is still located there, and that's still her spatial location there determines her access not just to water, but to economic opportunities, to electricity, also to the education of her children, and today access to a ventilator if she contracts COVID-19. Those are the outcomes of planners of that day, I would argue. So the question I'm asking really is, what is our job as planners today? What do we have to show for us for ourselves as a profession? But what I can also say is that the saying is never waste a crisis. COVID-19, as all of the panelists have already said, is redefining life as we've known it. Is it perhaps an opportunity then for the planning profession to reassert its strategic role in development? As budgets are and will continue to be squeezed and needs continue to increase, are we not the profession that can maximize development outcomes for my grandmother in a way that will transform her life sustainably? Should we perhaps be more intentional and deliberate in asserting the role of planners across the development chain, right from the strategic role all the way to development control? I have seen some, you said I chair Zutari board. I've seen some of the planners in Zutari starting to play some role at a strategic level, supporting discussions around health. And I'd like to see more of that from the planning profession. As a parting shot, Nelly, like Christine Lagarde, who I admire very much, I'm urging planners that, I quote, we need to dare. We need to dare the difference.
Fantastic.
Dare means to take risks, to step out of our comfort zones, to let hope extinguish fear, and courage to conquer timidity. And that's my proposition, and that's my challenge to you as planners that are practicing this afternoon. Thank you, Nelly.
Wow. Thank you very much, Gugu, for those words. It's really, I'm saying Gugu, I mean Lulu. Just to correct myself there. And that's really a wonderful, wonderful challenge that you posed to us about daring to lead and daring to make a difference in a world that is crying for solutions and crying for responses, especially from us within the built environment. I know you've touched on areas that all of us might have been, kind of concerned and fascinated about and wondering where we are. But I do love your finishing point of saying, dare to lead, dare to step out, dare to get out of the comfort zone and actually say what you mean and mean what you say. So thank you very much for sharing those words. And I look forward to hear our panel member responses to how they are engaging, and also to those who are listening to us virtually in terms of how they are proposing that we engage going forward. I'd like to now move to our second speaker, and that is going to be Ms. Yondela Silimela. Yondela is an urban planner with over 20 years of experience in practice. She has a strong appreciation and passion for the role of cities as drivers of sustainable national economic growth, with potential for equitable distribution of urban divide. Between 2012 and 2017, she was an executive director, development planning at City of Johannesburg. And that's one of our largest metropolitan areas in Johannesburg for those who are out of South Africa. Prior to joining the City of Joburg, she was with the Public Investment Corporation. And again, that is one of the largest asset companies within South Africa, where Yondela gained quite a considerable experience in private real estate investment. He has acute appreciation of the possibilities to be able to lever in terms of exploring and exploiting the functions of cities. So I think having worked in both at the metropolitan areas, having worked with investment houses, Yondela has got quite a clear sense of what all of this means in terms of bringing cohesion within the built environment. She is currently not even in South Africa. She reaches us here from Paris, and we do appreciate her taking time to be able to converse with us at home, indicating to us that you can operate and should operate from anywhere across the globe. But her heart is still very much in South Africa, we hope. After running her boutique advisory company, Yondela, as I've mentioned, is currently sitting in Paris, where she's working at the World Bank as a senior specialist there, and obviously serving all the other nationalities across board in the globe. As you do know, the World Bank operates across, but the issues that they're being confronted with, I believe, are very much similar to what we do have in South Africa, and particularly now with regards to COVID-19. We would like to hear from Yondela as to what are your views, what are you taking, and what is your call to action, particularly in this Women's Month. So with those few words, I'd like to welcome Yondela.
Thank you very much, Nelly. Thank you for that introduction, and good afternoon to everyone, and thanks to SACPLAN for the invitation. Good afternoon to all the planners that are listening. The previous speaker has actually set the tone for what I'm going to speak about. And I think just to reemphasize what she said, that COVID has really just put a spotlight and deepened crisis that we know. So the difficulties or challenges of poverty, inequality, and underdevelopment, this is not anything new to planners. And women suffer the multiple deprivation, and we stand, or we sit, however you put it, at the confluence of all of these challenges. But the pandemic also provides us an opportunity to accelerate and scale up some of the ideas and innovations that we've been toying with. So as she said, never waste a crisis. So it's time for us to put this crisis to good use. But we also need to recognize that the planning interventions tend to have a long runway. And so it is while the health practitioners are dealing with the kind of immediate recovery and dealing with the health challenges that we need to be thinking about, in fact, not thinking about putting in place measures to ensure that the recovery is resilient and that we build back better. And I have some ideas, or rather some ideas on what we can do to focus on how we can build back better as a planning profession. I want to suggest, or at least focus on 3 areas, and the fourth one is a cross-cutting one. So the first one is around infrastructure design, and again, as Lulu said, the recovery is likely to be driven from government through infrastructure spend, and we need to think about how the infrastructure is provided in terms of access, but as built environment professionals, think about the design of infrastructure, and I'll talk about that a little bit. The second key area is around the whole regulatory environment. So there are certain intervention points that we have total control of as planners in government and those in private practice, and there's some ideas on what we can do. The third issue that I'd like to focus on is modes of engagement. So how do we engage women and vulnerable groups? How do we amplify their voice? And how do we make sure that we hear that voice? Because it's one thing to have the voice on, quite another to hear it. So that's the third topic I'll focus on. And then just finally, a cross-cutting issue around data and evidence-based decision-making. So how do we constantly check the basis of the decisions that we make and validate them through data? So to talk briefly about it on infrastructure, as I said, I mean, the focus will largely be on access and provision of infrastructure, but I'd like to focus on the importance of design in infrastructure design. And I'd like to do that looking at 3 infrastructure types. The one is sidewalks and pavements. From a commuting point of view, last mile connectivity, sidewalks or pavements play such an important role in democratizing the public realm. It's places where we interact, it's places where we trade, it's also places where we move. And I have found that generally in South African cities, we're very, very stingy with the width of sidewalks. And the conversation on the width of sidewalks is often driven by engineers, whether it's traffic engineers or infrastructure engineers. So wide enough to carry the technical infrastructure underneath, but not so wide as to impede the movement of cars. But if you think about what has been happening in many cities, and especially cities in the global north, on social distancing, there's been a huge focus on how public space, not just parks, but roads and streets, roads and sidewalks are being used as part of the space that must be used for social distancing. Paris has been quite interesting in that Mayor Hidalgo has been quite brave in clawing back streets or street space from cars and setting aside for cycling. A lot of cafes are now expanding onto the sidewalk and have taken up some road space so that they're able to socially distance while serving customers. So and I do think that in South Africa, one of the things that we must and should do is to rethink the design codes and standards that are set aside for sidewalks. And it's an important issue, even from a safety point of view. So think about it as a woman who is walking, whether you have a child in a pram or you've got groceries, if the sidewalk is tight, the risk of being groped, of being pickpocketed is much higher. Your ability to avoid interacting with a person when you feel uncomfortable is limited if the sidewalk is very narrow. So I must say, having lived here for just over a year now, I really have grown to appreciate generous sidewalks, but also well-maintained sidewalks with proper lighting and so on. The second infrastructure type that I'd like to talk about is public conveniences, and the extent to which we provide public toilets. I cannot think of a single instance where I worked on where I knew off by heart what the number of public toilets per meter of road or per GLA of retail space. I mean, it's not something that we think about, but if you think about women's ability to move around cities or urban spaces, what do you do when you need to use a bathroom? Where they are available, they tend to be tucked away. So think about where they are typically in taxi ranks. They tend to be tucked away. And if it's not well lit and well maintained, women are exposed to personal safety when they're trying to use public conveniences. And I think these are conversations and design interventions and design considerations in the provision of infrastructure that we need to think more deliberately about, and think about them specifically with a female eye. And then the third one is around public open spaces. So and I'm talking specifically recreational, active public open spaces. I think at the World Health Organization, the standard is 9 square meters of public open space per person. European Union, I think it's 26 square meters per person. I would be hard pressed be quite keen to see what the standard is in South African cities and what the level of access is. And it's important to not average these things out, because averaging hides a multitude of sins. But if you look at the public space provision in low income areas versus wealthy suburbs in South Africa, I can guarantee that there are vast differences between those. So adequate public open spaces, again, because they become spaces of refuge. So think about this period of lockdown and being locked up at home. Where do you take children safely? Where do you allow your children to go out safely? And it's the issue with public open spaces is not just the quantity of space that's provided, it's the location, it's the size, it's the design, it's maintenance. And this is where we need to think and apply concepts such as crime prevention through environmental design, that we can actually design in safety in a number of infrastructure interventions if we keep in mind the needs and the roles that that women play and the vulnerabilities that they have, because it's physical vulnerability, it's emotional vulnerability. So we need to be conscious of these as we think about the public spaces. The second area I wanted to talk about was around regulation. A vast majority of people in our cities and urban areas are in informal employment, and sometimes even their homes, many times the homes they live in are informal. And what we tend to do is to conflate informality and illegality. And I think we need to be very deliberate in delinking informality and illegality. So think about shopping malls. A shopping mall will attract a taxi rank. A taxi rank will attract informal traders. And yet in our planning codes, we do not provide upfront the requirements for number of taxi ranks per square meter of GLA of retail space and number of informal trading stalls and everything else that they need for every public transport bay that's provided. So in effect, what we do, we delegitimize what is a normal economic concentration of activities. We know these things go together. And by not consciously providing for them in our regulatory framework as a consequence, and as a basis of which we can provide the infrastructure, we delegitimize poor people's access to urban amenity and the urban dividend. And a large proportion of those people tend to be females. And then what is even worse, we don't enforce the regulations because we know intuitively that the regulations are ridiculous. We can't always send the police to remove the informal traders like taxi ranks, and we think we're doing them a favor, but we're actually doing them a disservice by them not being part of the regulatory framework. They don't have the protections that you and I have. They're not able to quantify their inventory, for instance, and finance on the back of the inventory that they have. So it's really important that we consciously understand the overlap between informality and illegality, and understand that women bear or are disproportionately exposed to that. The second is around just rethinking our regulatory standards. So the process through which rights are obtained. And Lulu, you spoke about land use planners, and they play a particularly important role. So think about, for instance, early childhood facilities and what it takes to open an early childhood facility, a legal early childhood facility in a typical township, whether it is formal or informal. And these are facilities that women need to be able to participate in the labor force, because if you've got nowhere safe and convenient to leave your children or your child, your ability to work is limited. So there was a project we were running in Johannesburg where we were trying to formalize many early childhood development facilities because there was an insurance company that was wanting to sponsor them, and their requirement was that they must be legal. And it was mind-boggling, the requirements that we had for these crashes or ladies who look after children to comply with. So this is something that we really, really do need to think about. We need to think about what it takes for a land use change to happen in a particular context. Spaza in a typical township, what does it take for a spaza to be legal? And what does it mean for a spaza operator who has put a lot of their capital into the business to not be legal? So thinking about regulatory processes and the hoops that we make people to go through is important. Thinking about regulatory coverage. So who is legal and who is illegal, and what does it take to be legal, and what does it take to be illegal? And understanding who carries the burden of that, I think, is an important thing. The third and final point that I want to make is around engagement. And here, just the extent and the manner in which we hear women's voices. So when we have participatory processes, whether it is an IDP, a precinct plan, or whatever, so whatever the scale of planning that we add, if we do not understand, if we do not know the demographic profile of the planning unit that we are planning for, and we're not deliberate in disaggregating that data to understand who is impacted by the envisaged change, who can shape it, and hear the voices of those who are impacted and those who shape the change. And here the interesting thing, so if you think about the typical public participation process that is driven by a municipality, We send an email or we post on the municipal website, all interested and affected parties to register. We assume that there's equitable access to digital platforms. We assume that women whose voices we want to hear have access, and that's often incorrect. And then that's often followed by written submissions and then maybe face-to-face community meetings. Many times the community meetings happen in the evening because that's when people are home from work. But that's also often the time that women are at home looking after children and preparing food for their families, because again, to Lulu's point about the roles that women play, so their roles as homekeepers, right? So we really do need to be deliberate in designing public engagement processes that amplify the voices of women. And us women who are in public service in the built environment must constantly check our own privilege. My engagement with pavements for a very long time was I didn't like cobble because it wasn't good for a stiletto. But that was the extent of my worrying about sidewalks. Now that I walk to get to and from, now I think carefully, I'm so conscious of what good public lighting does in the sense of safety. So we really do need to constantly check our own privilege and make sure that we're not filtering the everyday woman's experience through our experience, because our experience, because we are middle class privilege, does not reflect the experience of the majority. And I would advocate here that built environment professionals need strong engagements and partnerships with institutions of higher learning, with advocacy groups. We tend to have this echo chamber where we talk to each other. Built environment professionals tend to talk to each other. And so we see the world in only one way. And I think we do need to expand that and kind of hear voices from multiple institutions, and it will only just enrich the quality of the solutions that we put forward. Thank you very much.
Wow. Thank you very much, Yondela, for that practical and thought-provoking, bringing it down to the reality on the ground and what we face on a daily basis, but also being very candid with us that sometimes the things that we worry about are perhaps far removed in the responses that we see. I'm particularly touched by your reference to the early childhood centers, which, as we know, are still closed under COVID, and yet women are required to go back to work. And how do we, as local planners in our municipalities, do think about the location or even the availability of such services while we seek to be part of the economic growth of our countries? Thank you so much, Yondela, for that. I see there are questions coming through, and we will try and respond to them as we go. In interest of time, we do have quite a jam-packed response, and I don't want to take on from the time from listening to our speakers. So I'll go on straight to our respondents on the panel who are going to respond to what has been laid forth, but also to express in their own experiences as women planners in the face of COVID-19, and particularly in this Women's Month, how we're responding to the challenges that we've got. And for that, I'm going to turn on to Gugu, who is based out in KZN, and she's juggling many balls at the moment. We do know that Gugu is on maternity leave at the moment, and we just want to appreciate her for taking the time and to say that we are in waiting with you, we are in anticipation with you during this time of COVID-19. And even as the baby is expected to arrive quite soon. She's got a BTech in management from Durban University of Technology. She's got a master's in town planning from University of Pretoria. Gugu is the founder and director of Zipelele Planning and Environmental Consultancy, where she practices in a whole range of areas in the built environment industry. And most recently, Gugu has been also one of the founding members of Women in Planning South Africa. We were quite delighted to come across this group, Gugu, and we particularly want to give a good big cheers to you for stepping out in the same way as Lulu was saying, that we dare to lead. So if you see something, say something, do something. And here is a group of women who are actually doing something. And I did listen to her conversation this morning from Talking Transformation. And one of the things that she's also doing through their WIPSA is ensuring that they're supporting interns, the students who are graduating. They're looking for mentors. So if there's anybody out there who wants to be a mentor, man or woman, Gugu's team have got a list of internships, intern students who are looking for places to have some opportunity to practice. So please reach out to them. She's also served on a series of tribunals in KZN. And beyond that, one of the things that captivated me about Gugu is when she said that we need to think beyond just making of maps and doing nice policy strategies and documents. So she's really looking for practical ways of us responding to our immediate environment. So Gugu, over to you.
Thank you very much, Nelly, for that introduction. I'm actually proud of myself when I listen to that kind of introduction. Like my fellow panelists have spoken, I'm not going to repeat what they've already spoken about. They've spoken a lot about the need for planners to take a leading role when it comes to development issues. And I think that it is something that is close to my heart and what we've been talking about as Women in Planning South Africa. I often find that as town planners, we sort of like inferior when it comes to development issues and being decisive. And we find that other professions in the sector have taken a leading role when it comes to those issues. So based on what has been discussed today, what my question is, who best to lead this call for action than us as women in planning? I think as women, we have better appreciation of issues faced by women in our community. So I think it's high time that we are given opportunity to participate meaningfully when it comes to policy and decision making. So one of the things that Women in Planning South Africa is advocating for, and what we are hoping to encourage, is the concept of gender mainstreaming. So what we are talking about there is basically the need for policies that are clear about how gender issues are to be addressed, to ensure that we address social infrastructure issues. It's something that my fellow panelists have also spoken about, because what we find is that planners, they are mostly involved during the planning stages. But when it comes to directing your social infrastructure investments, we are nowhere to be found to actually direct the needs where they are needed the most. So I'm encouraging planners to be involved from the planning of the projects to the actual implementation of the project. That's what we are talking about when we're saying we want a meaningful participation in these policy decisions and also the implementation itself. So I think what I've seen also on the chats is people saying that the challenge that we have as planners is political influence as well. But what I'm saying is that if we continue or insist on talking about these issues as we're doing now and having these platforms where we can engage and find common solutions as women, I'm sure that somebody can finally hear what we are trying to achieve, and we'll be able to influence political decisions. So I think we need to continue to talk about these issues. That is why we have created this platform as Women in Planning South Africa, for women to come on board and do a little bit of research in terms of what can we put forward in order to make sure that we address political influence in terms of implementing our policies, our strategic plans, and ensuring that people understand what our role is in terms of development issues. I find it very frightening that in this day and age, people don't understand what the role of town planning or town planners when it comes to development. The only thing that they think about is the mega infrastructure, which is done by engineers or architects, and you are nowhere to be found. So I think it's high time that planners, we take our leadership role. Development issues is our responsibilities. When I was talking to Pete the other day, I emphasized the fact that planning goes beyond planning those mega infrastructure projects. We are more concerned also about the social well-being of our communities. So we understand the holistic view of development issues. So that is why I feel that we are the profession that needs to take a leading role when it comes to these things. But also, Nelly has spoken about the issue of mentorship or internship. I understand that it's not a topic of today's discussion, but what I want to highlight in the beginning, I spoke about innovation. What I like about young planners is their innovative way of thinking. So I think that what COVID-19 has taught us is the need to innovate and approach things differently. So if we can think about different ways of involving young graduates in terms of formulating these policies, in terms of implementing these policies, I think they can assist us in coming up with fresh ideas. So what we are calling for in our organization as well as Women in Planning South Africa is that if there's anyone who's willing to provide mentorship to the graduates, that will be a very great, because having been in the private sector for quite some time, I understand how sad it is not being able to provide opportunities to these graduates just because of the economic landscape that we find ourselves in. So being innovative now, I was actually, I got a call the other day from the other prospective intern, and they were asking whether it's possible to actually get these mentorships remotely. So I think maybe that's one of the things that we need to think about. People don't necessarily need to be in our offices, but we can provide that guidance remotely, get them involved in the projects that we're doing, and then guide them and assist them to register. So I think that's the way we're going to be approaching things going forward after this COVID-19 pandemic. And then I just want to encourage women planners as well to also assist other students in terms of guiding them with their career choices. Because what I've found is that when interns start to work in the workplace, some of them, they only find that this is not the area that they actually want to specialize on. So I think the guidance, the career guidance, is still very much needed in our profession. So we want to provide that opportunity as women in planning as well. We want to go back to universities, to schools, and talk to students about what town planning really entails, because people are really confused about what our role is when it comes to development. People are still asking us whether we are developing towns, which is not what we are actually doing as planners. So in closing, what I would like to just say is, and to repeat, is that it is very important that as town planners, we take a leadership role when it comes to development issues, and to participate in this policy formulation, policy implementation, to also again assist graduates in terms of mentorship, because I do believe in them. I do believe that they've got great ideas to share with us going forward. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Gugu, for sharing that. And I see on the comment line, we're saying we should go beyond even mentoring. We should be looking at coaching as well. And there is a lot of agreement with what you're saying there. So thank you for sharing that. I'd like now to direct our attention to our next panel member, who is coming all the way from Western Cape. Radia, I've known for quite a while when we were still in the Western Cape, practicing and all around city of Cape Town and the Western Cape area. She is a town planner by training, a registered member. She's currently serving in the provincial government as a chief town planner. Radia studied in Cape Town, first at the Cape Technicon and then at UCT. She's got a master's in philosophy, specializing in urban infrastructure, design, management from UCT. Raja has also been quite central to some of our conversations. She was a panel member in our last year's Women's Forum, and we do really want to thank her from the bottom of our hearts for agreeing to speak to us again. She has been quite instrumental in initiating gender mainstreaming within the departments where she works, and she's currently also in the Commonwealth Union of Planners, where she's been selected to be one of the judges, the panel judges there in this coming year's awards. Over and above all of that, she's a mother to 4 children who she says keeps her very busy. And I would now like to invite Raja to give us her take on the conversation today.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Nelly. I've actually prepared a presentation, unlike everybody else, but so I'm just going to get into it because I'm very mindful of time. So I have to share my screen, eh? Share screen. There we go. In the beginning, Nelly introduced the 5 topics that she presented to us as panelists. So the topic was initially, what can our cities and communities do better to eliminate violence against women and children? So I kind of thought about it and applied my mind and decided to look at the topic in terms of COVID, of looking at the way we plan already with spatial inequality, with unemployment that is rife and recession, and look at it as an intersection of crises, including COVID-19 now and gender-based violence. South Africa really is at an intersection of crises. So that's the topic that I'm focusing on today. Last year, in a few weeks' time, it will be a year since the 5th of September, when we all came out in our thousands. We were fuming, upset, anguished at the level of gender-based violence in our country. Am I next? Enough is enough is what we were chanting in front of Parliament and throughout cities all over South Africa. It's not that our gathering last year was the first campaign to address gender-based violence in South Africa. Since 1999, the 16 Days of Activism against for No Violence Against Women and Children campaign has been in effect. Efforts has been introduced in 2012 by the then Deputy President Kgalema Motlanthe to introduce a National Council Against Gender-Based Violence, and it was later abandoned due to a lack of funding. 2014, the National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence campaign was launched again. And then in 2016, following our outcry and outpour and international attention, the president announced the 1.1 billion allocated to the fight against gender-based violence in the country and introduced the 5-point emergency plan to address gender-based violence in South Africa. However, since August last year, when our campaign started, these are just some of the faces between August and last week. These are some of the faces of the victims who were brutally murdered in South Africa. And the level of brutality is something that we just cannot reconcile. It just makes no sense. And this includes vulnerable children, and you can see it's women from all walks of life. No one is excluded from this the scourge of gender-based violence in South Africa. And now we look at government's response to COVID-19. Days after it was first declared, the first case was picked up in South Africa, national state of disaster was declared. The army was deployed and funds was rerouted to address COVID relief programs. And we know about the billions that was sourced from external loans to look at this, at least to address this pandemic. There was intensive consultation with all sectors, public and private, the banking sector, NGOs, political parties sang from the same hymn sheet. It was quite an impressive gathering, and people standing, institutions and public sector standing together, singing from one hymn sheet. Trade unions, even traditional leaders, were all drawn in to come and try to attempt to address, come up with an adequate response to this pandemic. Curfews were instated and lockdowns was announced, and the risk-adjusted strategy was announced and was developed. And then the ban on sale of alcohol and cigarettes was introduced, which we all know how that was received. I'm moving from one pandemic to the next. I'm looking at the COVID pandemic and then the gender-based violence pandemic on the other hand. So looking at the crime statistics between April 2019 and March 2020, 53,293 sexual offenses, including rape, sexual assault, and other crimes, were happened during that time. And just remember, this excludes a lockdown period. And looking at that number, still remember that excludes that only 1 in 20 cases are reported. So that number is probably highly underreported. That 53,000 is not a true reflection of the cases of assault, rape in South Africa. Every day, 110 women are raped in South Africa. 1 in 3 women have experienced abuse from an intimate partner in their lifetime. And 3,000 women are murdered in South Africa every year. Every 3 hours, a woman is murdered in South Africa. So that is 8 women per day. So if you look at our panelists, one of us could have been one of that statistics. When the lockdown was introduced, the slogan, "You are not stuck at home, you are safe at home," was coined. But what was not realized was that when women that are already subject to abuse, what we did now was actually confine them in this space with the abusers during the lockdown. So under general circumstances, the common tools of abuse is isolation from friends and family, economic dependence, constant surveillance, so where you go, who are you talking to, restricting access to food, clothing, sanitary products, and restricting access to education. So in order to keep the woman contained and under the thumb of the perpetrator. And what the lockdown actually did was confine people in spaces. And if you understand the reality of homes for the majority of South Africans, it's very small spaces that are shared with family members. But under the context of COVID also, before COVID, there's already an exceptionally high unemployment rate in South Africa. And with the introduction of COVID, many people were retrenched, businesses had to close. And so there's that tension about the finances within the house, the lack of food, the lack of funds for electricity and things like that. There was a big flow of looting and all across the country because people were waiting on food parcels and things like that. And women who were employed in the informal sector and in the personal care services, the women doing the braiding of their hair, women selling things on the street, if it's food or fruit and vegetables, and who were largely independent, financially independent, now have lost their revenue and the opportunity to generate an income. And they also were unable to access traditional support structures such as family, friends, and religious institutions. Coupled with that, the ban on alcohol and cigarette sales also increased the level of tension and aggression by the perpetrators during the lockdown period. Other impacts of lockdown to abuse women. During the first 2.5 to 3 months of COVID, courts were closed. So women who were subject to abuse could not access the courts. They were not able to get protection orders. Divorce proceedings were halted, and that meant that that the law became inaccessible and they had to live with the perpetrators under the same roof, and they had no option to leave. Also, that they were unable to access sexual reproduction services. So the birth control, they were not able to get that during the lockdown period. So they're not able to exercise the rights over their bodies, to plan families, to plan whether or not they would like to have more children, because there simply wasn't access. And then they might not have had, if they were in a situation where they needed to seek help, they perhaps didn't have the funds to take taxis or get transport to get to a shelter or police station, or the services was limited during that first hard lockdown. They really had to prove that they were going to work, they were essential services, things like that. But then something as simple as they were unable to access data, they simply didn't have money. And then public places such as libraries were closed, so they couldn't access free Wi-Fi, free internet to see what options they had to seek help. And then there was fear of contravening the lockdown rules, because it was very clear you can only go out for X, Y, and Z. And we were uncertain about how the police and the army would actually respond to you being on the street. So those were the kind of impacts of the lockdown that was, I think, unforeseen, but should have been thought of beforehand.
Yes. Radiat, I hate to interrupt, but just to indicate that a bit of time concerns. So if you could go towards the concluding statements, just to allow us a few minutes to also take some questions as well. But this is very, very, very helpful, and it will be availed for the webinar attendants.
Okay, I just want to highlight the need, the importance of shelters for abused women and children in our urban spaces. They play a very important role in our urban space, well, in all settlements. I will just skip to just mention that during COVID, there was a lot of adaptation responses that was introduced. Refurbishing of spaces, temporary shelters, levels of ingenuity that was introduced. And what became the new normal now for us, temperature checks, hand sanitizing, the wearing of masks and social distancing is now the new normal. But what now, based on all of our experiences, what is the new normal for planning? How are we going to play a role? And I think that any worthwhile gender-based violence intervention should be a multifaceted approach, and there is a role for planning to serve that purpose. So based on the earlier conversations from the first presenter, we definitely have to start to raise our voices and be part of that discussion and influence the spend of the budget, allocate the R1 billion allocation to respond to COVID, and make sure that it includes response to gender-based violence. I think, in my opinion, shelters for abused women and children needs to be seen as an essential component of settlement infrastructure. Bureaucratic red tape for NGOs to access underutilized buildings, to expand their spaces. And then shelters need second and third stage homes for survivors of abuse. So there's another type of housing that is required that we need to start thinking about. And then good planning and urban design prevention measures to make sure that women are safe in the urban spaces, in their spaces. So adequate lighting, safe movement routes. There's just some examples there, but also the community needs to be very much involved in the response to gender-based violence and response to planning in their communities. So the images that I've shown there, I'm not sure how clear it is, but it's we should include crime mapping, the mapping of hotspots, crime hotspots in our as we plan, so that we have adequate responses to the needs of our community, which includes their safety needs. And Yondela was speaking about pavements. It's more than just a sidewalk. places of gathering and places of play that we should be considering. And then this is my last slide. This is just an example of the VPUU, the violence prevention through urban upgrade. Sorry, my kids in the background. But the image in the bottom right-hand corner was an example of an unutilized space, but it was also a space where a lot of crime was happening. Through interventions through the VPUU, it was an urban design intervention. It was developed into a space of gathering, a multi-functional space, and with a lot of community involvement, a lot of involvement in also surveillance and the maintenance of these spaces. But these are just examples of what, and that's how I'm going to close now. So I just had to rush through that. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Raja, for sharing with us. We're just going to go back into full screen again. Colleagues and panel members and those who are listening, I know we did say that 3:30, but we'll try and see if we can steal 5 or so minutes thereafter. I would like to now introduce our next respondent, who is a student, Ms. Kiara Rampol, who was flashed into the limelight by being in a beauty pageant and all of that, but she said she felt like she needed to be in a space that had more influence and more impact, and because of that she went into planning. She's currently doing her master's degree at UKZN, and she is hoping to talk to us from a student's perspective, to share with us why she came into planning and what she hopes for, because from what she can see, even during COVID, it seems like there is a lot that can be done better in our communities, and especially in our townships and the informal areas of our communities, towns and cities. So Kiara, over to you.
Thank you, Ms. Nelly, and thank you to SACPLAN for this opportunity. I feel honored to be on this platform with such strong and influential women in the planning profession. So yes, the COVID-19 pandemic is a disaster that has severely disrupted the normal functioning of populations around the world. It has transformed the way we live, attend school, university, and work. And to build on what Dr. Lulu said earlier, yes, this pandemic is exposing all the problems that were already in existence in our society, and women and girls are disproportionately affected. I think urban planning has been largely ineffective in addressing urban violence, and particularly slow in responding to gender violence, in my opinion. I think the fear of crime and violence is endemic among urban dwellers across the world, and we as planners should be confronting this issue in our attempts to build better communities and cities. And Dr. Lulu spoke to the safety aspect of planning design, mentioning that it should be at the top of the list when planners, design spaces, etc. And Ms. Yondela broke it down into 3 points. I think the first was infrastructure design, and I'm totally in agreement, saying yes, in creating safe physical environments, we need to ensure adequate lighting on the street and in and around public facilities such as your toilets. There should be visibility by maybe removing physical structures like trees or walls that obstruct the lighting. Further, I think maybe we should adopt a gender responsive physical design features for public sanitation facilities. More to that, I think we should also invest in beautifying and cleaning up our cities or neighborhoods to reduce the perception of abandonment and fear that often leads to violence. I think this also could be done through developing an operation and maintenance plan for public infrastructure and services to ensure the sustainability of the physical design features. Ms. Yolanda further said, the regulatory environment was her second point, and the thirdly was the modes of engagement. And I think it's important that we develop a module review like the training curriculum for urban planners, designers, and architects that includes women's and girls' safety issues. We maybe need to build the capacity of urban planners and designers in gender analysis for the use of public spaces. We should involve women and young girls as active participants in the identification of the priority safety issues. They could show us, the unsafe public spaces, contributing factors, and possible solutions to improve their safety. What else was I going to say? Yes, we need to develop a gender-sensitive safety criteria for integration in urban planning and design standards for creating safe and women-friendly cities, basically an inclusive city. think there's a need to create or review maybe local or government municipal policies, programs, and services to address identify priority safety issues and to prevent violence against women and girls. We need to increase visible maybe police presence, or maybe we should maybe look at creating a woman-only police station in the unsafe neighborhoods for women, or children units with local stations. What else is there? Okay, just to close up a little bit. Yes, Dr. Lulu concluded with a powerful statement. It was dare to take risk, or dare to lead, dare to come out, something along those lines. And in light of this, I think that young planners like myself are hoping to create tangible solutions that will create inclusive cities and shape the future of our world. I understand that in this profession, whatever we do will affect people's lives, and that would determine the quality of their existence. And the idea is to set the example and define the standards. There are others like me who are still studying that share these similar views, and I think it's up to us and planners to ensure that we transform this into reality. And I'm driven to make an impact in the city and others around the world. And yeah, that's all from me, Miss Nelly.
Thank you very much, Kiara, for sharing those. And I think it does kind of bring to mind the freshness and the perspective that involving the young people themselves as well in the process of planning for towns and communities. And the fact that planners are very well placed to be able to do so. Yes, we may not have done enough in the past, but I think, again, how not to waste this opportunity that has been provided to us to respond in much more forceful ways, as opposed to an afterthought. I'd like now to call on to our final panel member, who's not really final, but in a way is helping us consolidate all the thinking that has come through. She's also been my partner in crime for organizing this seminar and trying to get the right people on board in trying to coordinate the way that we structure it. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Professor Hope to share with us. She's not only a professor, she's a researcher, she's an author, and she's been doing quite a lot in mentoring PhD students and also supervising their work. So Dr. Hope, over to you.
Thank you very much, colleagues. Such interesting things when you sit down and listen to people, especially if you are in academia, because all you do is to talk all the time. So I like the position I'm given today to just give some few highlights. And what comes to mind, I liked all the presentations. They came through very strongly and emphasizing the need for women to take a leadership role. But what I want to emphasize on, and maybe I'm being biased because I'm in academia, is the issue about the curriculum and what are these people being taught, and versus what we're supposed to be producing and what is the society is expecting. And as I'm sitting here, and I like what the first two speakers have said, especially when they're talking about the disparities in terms of the services in rural areas and urban areas. And I started asking myself, is that, are we equipping our students to a level where they will be able to react when they go out there? And then I was reminded about the type of case studies that we use, or what we call fieldwork studies that we use when students are supposed to go out and do some exercises. And I think it's very important that in academia, we need to step up and also respond to the challenges and prepare students in a way that they will be able to respond to some of these needs. Because if we are talking about disparities and the situation around planning, if you've noticed, most of planning and planners, when we talk planning and planners, we're more talking about urban-orientated kind of setup, what needs to be done in every areas, and you find that we kind of put a lot of effort, and I think this that's where planners should be working. But I think that notion needs to be changed, and I believe academics, they can play a serious role, a very transformative role to make sure that that's changed in the way we impact into our curriculum. And the other important thing is that we need evidence. And this is very important. If we are to convince politicians out there about all these things we are talking about, and this is not to say we don't have evidence, but I think we need to develop a culture of documenting things, put evidence down, and we're able to convince them with evidence. Because what we're saying, that's a problem, that's the very nature of planning, is that it's a very diverse on its own, right? So you can be very strong in certain areas in policy framework and design. So we need to be able to bring all these skills together, bring different planners together with different skills and put evidence together. And this is what will take us to the action. Because I'm beginning to think, then what then? After this, what does this mean? Because we don't have the same strength. And our curriculum, as the way they are designed, is very, and I've looked at this very closely, it's very difficult to make sure that you produce the same skills at the same level across all planning institutions. It's very difficult because it's dependent on the strength. And like I said, our work is diverse in nature. So I think those are some of the issues that we need to reflect on. And just in conclusion, Nelly, when we are saying that we need the planning to be more, should I say, localized, yes, let me use the word localized. This does not mean that we shouldn't reflect on the international experiences or international cases. But what this means, it means that let's focus on where the student will end up working, but with the mindful fact that we also want them to be international. And I like where Yondela is now because she can also able to compete in that market. So that would be my reaction for now, and we'll take the questions. I don't want to take a lot of time.
Thank you very much for saving us a few minutes there. And just for those who are wondering, we will make sure that Raja's presentation is also available for everybody. In terms of comments, we've had from Rita, we've had from Zama, Ron, Bondo, Cindy, Thelma, all of them commenting on the issues that we are talking about. And one of the questions that came through that I'd like to pose to any of the panel members to react to was the issue about IDPs and whether we as planners are doing enough with the IDP process at the moment. It seems like the plans are prepared, but nobody ever follows up to see if indeed they have been implemented or otherwise. The other question that's coming through that I'd like to see any of the panel members responding to is this issue about, and I think Dr. Gwakwa brought it up about the infrastructure processes and the budgetary processes that are going on, also mentioned by Radia, about following the money. You know, if you don't have money to make a difference or where the money is being spent, it's unlikely that we'll see the solutions that we're looking for. So just to get by show of unmuting yourself, if you'd like to speak to any of those issues, I do think there've been quite some tangible points raised by all the panel members. I'm opening up for any of the panel members to give a response to that.
Well, in the Western Cape, we actively trying to integrate the spatial development framework projects with the IDP plan, because there definitely is a mismatch between those. And it takes, and we're trying to make sure that the SPLUMA principles actually feed in, but it's a ongoing process over the years. Over time, we are getting there, but municipalities have to be reminded. And what we do also is engage one-on-one with the planners of the municipality and the IDP managers. Once there's a good working relationship between the two, you get quite an understanding. But also, this is also happening in the context of limited budgets. And the projects that are included in an SDF are sometimes as a nice to have, a wish list when the municipality is dealing with immediate crises. And the immediate crises often are informal settlements, land invasions, the provision of immediate services, basic services to settlements. But what that does, on the other hand, it takes away from the opportunity of the municipality to generate income through other manners, and it takes away from the spending of budgets on infrastructure and maintenance. So that is our experience in the Western Cape. We are actively trying to do that through our LGMT processes.
Okay, thank you for that response. Lindelwa is asking, what about property? Planners involved in the property sector, and how do we make a difference in the built environment and settlement provisions? I'd like to maybe pose that to Yondela, and maybe Dr. Gwakwa, you may have experienced some of the investments that you're engaged with to give us a response.
Thank you, if I may. So I think that planners certainly do have a role, in fact, have multiple roles. from regulating land use to understanding property markets and therefore determining what future development patterns cities should take. But I think that we often have an adversarial role with private sector developers. And I think that's something that we need to change in cities. We need to better understand the logic and rhythm of real estate development, and make a more compelling case for the development ideals that we put forward. Because I think it's an understanding real estate economics and developers understanding planning policies and ideals that we find workable solutions. I mean, one of the questions that was asked is this changing world of work, what does that mean for all the commercial buildings that are potentially going to be left unoccupied, and whether planners are thinking about different ways that those spaces could be utilized.
Dr. Kwakwa?
No, I think for sake of time, let's take another question. I think Yondela is really addressed the issue. I think the only one that I'd just briefly talk about is the IDPs. I really think by their very nature, if you go back to the IDP process, even in legislation, I mean, it is about the role of planning in there. Whichever way you started, it brought both from a strategic point of view within the municipality all the way to the land use level. So I just see the ownership of the IDP process as something that really should be sitting with planners. Again, Yundela talked about the public participation process. I mean, to what extent are we driving those processes? So for me, it's really quite critical.
Thank you for that. Gugu, would you like to add anything?
Actually, I wanted to talk about the IDP, but I think the responses that have been given are adequate. But just to mention again, I think it's the issue that I was talking about, having the policies that are practical, or development plans that are really practical and addressing the issues on the ground. So what you often find with the IDPs is that there's a lot of background information or situational information to tell us about the problems that you are facing. But when it comes to the interventions that are put forward, when you look at the capital infrastructure projects, they are not really addressing the issues on the ground. That is why we are talking about directing the social infrastructure projects where they are required the most, based on the data that we have in the IDP. So I think that's where we're currently lacking as planners, to ensure that we are responding directly to the issues as we are talking about in our IDPs.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much for that. Zama, Dakalo, and all the others are also raising issues about public and open park spaces. I must say that during the COVID-19, just those first few weeks when we were all not allowed to go out, suddenly the parks became such a precious commodity to have around us. And we do know for a fact that our communities, some of them don't really have any open spaces that are safe, let alone that they can actually occupy. And my question to the planners, particularly at the local municipal level, and those in the private practice who are assisting in the new developments, whether we are really thinking hard and critically about the spaces that are being provided for. I can't believe that in 2020 we are still having RDP settlements that don't have any of those provisions, or we are allowing private sector developments that provide all the houses and very gated communities, and yet, as Radia or one of the others was saying, that these developments do attract the informality around them. And there's also a recent paper that said that ours is really a planned informality. Failing to plan is planning for informality, and until we wake up and say this is not the environment that we're looking for, I wonder how many of our cities are leaving or releasing land for development purposes that cater for all the citizens of the country, and not just for developers who've got funding and pre-approved land isolated for development purposes. So these are critical issues to begin to think about the collective as opposed to just the individual kind of requirements or responses for approval. I know politics was raised as being an issue, and yet our politicians do make the decisions. For me, what I'm hearing from all our panel members is that ours is really an integrated and collaborative profession where we do more when we work with others than when we work alone. So my question is, how are we charging ourselves to go and influence all those other professions, or all our leaders, all our politicians? Are we at the right table? Are we asking the right questions? Are we commenting at the right time? Are we visible? Are we present? You know, do people know we exist? You know, so I think for me, if we were to leave COVID-19 without reaffirming some of these reasons why we came into this profession, we are really doing our future generation a disservice. And I, from my side, would really just like to thank the participants who have come on board to share with us, the people who are commenting on the chat, expressing what they're seeing, and some of those are very practical. People are talking about their lived experiences, the environments, you know, the toilets, police stations, you know, women being harassed after they've been battered and brutally injured, you know, as to why. Females, you know, being jostled around in the public transport areas, you know, and being told that the way they dress is asking for it. I mean, as we say, enough is enough. So I just really want us to take a critical view on what our role and what difference we can make if we dare to lead, if we dare to step out, if we dare to write, if we dare to be there, be present, and be visible. And so to all who are commenting through, just thank you very much. I'd like to now hand over to one of our appeals board member, Marty, just to give a vote of thanks. And then after that, we will be closing this section and wanting to thank everybody for being present. So Marty, over to you.
What an awesome conversation, and thank you so much to each and every one of you ladies, women. It's unbelievable to sit here and to think, I'm always proud to be a planner, but I think we do not use our voices enough, and we very often stand back, as we said, the whole debate about the IDPs and so forth. I would like to convey my vote of thanks to you, Dr. Hope, Prof. Hope, to you, Ms. Nelly. Thank you so much for everything that you've done today, all the arrangements that you've made. We really, really appreciate it. And then I would like to also thank SACPLAN and the office staff at SACPLAN who assisted with all the arrangements. And then the very important guests, which are all our panelists. Exciting times. If you think we all sit in different cities, in different spaces, in different towns and so forth. And I would like to say that this panel should continue, and we need to keep these things going as we can. I would like to close with the wise words of Michelle Obama. Unfortunately, I couldn't get anything from a local South African, but perhaps we can do it after this afternoon. She said, if there's one thing I've learned in life, it's the power of using your voice. So let's all think about that. Let us be blunt in what we say. Let us lift our heads up high, and let's show the world what South Africa can be all about. And have an awesome afternoon, and thank you again so much.